On a late afternoon in the city, the streets were busy but not chaotic. Cars rushed past, buses stopped and started again, and people hurried along the sidewalks carrying shopping bags or looking down at their phones. Among the crowd was an elderly woman moving slowly, almost struggling to keep up with the pace of the city. She had 2 large bags of groceries hanging from her thin arms, and her shoulders bent forward as if the weight of the bags pressed down, harder with every step. She stopped often, catching her breath, and looked around nervously at the flow of people passing her by. Most people glanced at her but quickly looked away, too caught up in their own schedules to lend a hand. She reached the curb where the traffic light had just turned red, and cars were lined up waiting. The woman hesitated. She clearly wanted to cross the street, but the wide avenue looked intimidating. She tried to adjust her bags, but they only seemed heavier in her hands. A man who had been standing a few steps away noticed her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with calm eyes that carried both kindness and firmness. His clothes were simple, nothing fancy, just a plain jacket and trousers. He didn't look like someone who wanted attention, and he certainly wasn't trying to stand out in the busy crowd. But when he saw the woman struggling, he stepped forward without hesitation. "Ma'am, let me help you," he said gently, his voice steady and respectful. The elderly woman looked up at him, startled at first. Then she gave a small sigh of relief, as though a burden had been lifted not just from her arms but from her heart. "Oh, thank you, young man," she replied, though she was old enough to call almost anyone young. The man carefully took the bags from her hands. They were heavy, but he carried them with ease. He placed 1 bag in each hand, balancing the weight effortlessly. He didn't rush her or make her feel embarrassed for needing help. Instead, he smiled warmly and nodded toward the crosswalk. "Let's go together. No hurry." The light turned green for pedestrians, and they began walking side by side across the wide avenue. The woman took slow, careful steps, and the man matched her pace perfectly, making sure she felt safe. Cars waited behind the crosswalk line, and though drivers might have been impatient, no one dared honk when they saw the scene. An older woman crossing with a man who moved with a quiet authority that wasn't boastful, but natural. As they reached the other side, the woman paused again to rest. The man set the grocery bags down gently and made sure she was steady on her feet. A couple of passers-by glanced at them, whispering to each other. Some admired the man's gesture. Others simply continued walking. In a city where kindness often went unnoticed, this small act stood out like a warm light. The woman smiled at him again, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "People don't stop like this anymore," she said softly. "Everyone is always in such a hurry." He shrugged with modesty. Sometimes slowing down is the right thing to do. The man didn't give away who he was. He didn't tell her that he had once led the nation's most powerful investigative agency. He didn't mention that his decisions had shaped history, or that he had sat in rooms where the fate of the country was being discussed. None of that mattered in this moment. What mattered was the woman standing in front of him, tired but smiling, needing just a little kindness. What the people around them didn't know was that this man had lived through countless tense situations. He had faced some of the sharpest minds in the world, challenged some of the toughest criminals, and carried secrets that most people could never imagine. Yet despite his past power and experience, he never thought himself too important for simple humanity. Helping someone cross the street felt just as meaningful to him as handling major cases had once been. As they stood there, the woman insisted, "I can carry the bags now. You've already done enough." But the man shook his head gently. "I've got them. Where are you heading?" She pointed to a small apartment building just a short walk away. "Only a block, right there." "Perfect," he said. "Let's finish the journey together." So they walked slowly down the block, the man carrying her groceries, the woman chatting about ordinary things, the price of food, the weather that week, and how the city felt faster than it used to. He listened, patiently, responding with small nods and the occasional thoughtful comment. He didn't interrupt her or seem distracted. His presence gave her a sense of comfort, as though for those few minutes she wasn't alone in the bustling world. When they reached her building, she stopped at the entrance and reached for her keys. The man placed her groceries by the door, so she could pick them up easily once she got inside. "Bless you, son," she said with a soft smile. "We need more men like you in this world." He smiled back, though he kept his thoughts to himself. If she had known who he truly was, she might have been even more surprised. But he wasn't seeking recognition or gratitude. For him, this was simply the right thing to do. Across the street, a small group of onlookers had noticed the entire scene. To them, it was just a man helping an old woman. But there was something striking in the way he carried himself. Even in such a humble act, his calmness, discipline, and dignity showed. They couldn't put their finger on it, but he seemed different. Someone used to responsibility, someone who had led with strength. The man himself never thought of it that way. To him, titles and positions came and went, but character stayed forever. And character was what he chose to live by, no matter where he was or who he was with. At that moment, he felt a quiet satisfaction. Not the kind that came from recognition or applause, but the kind that came from knowing he had eased someone's burden, even if only for a short time. He didn't expect the day to take any dramatic turn. He thought it would end there, with an old woman smiling at him gratefully and a few strangers noticing the exchange. But fate had other plans. While the man prepared to step away, thinking his task was done, someone else had been watching too. Someone whose eyes didn't see kindness, but only suspicion. This person, wearing a uniform and a badge, had drawn his own harsh conclusions without knowing the truth. In his mind, he wasn't witnessing an act of kindness. He was seeing something else entirely. The man who had quietly carried groceries across the street and walked with gentle patience had no idea that his good deed was about to lead into an entirely different situation, one that would reveal more than anyone expected about respect, prejudice, and hidden truths. The afternoon sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the sidewalk as the man turned to leave. At that very moment, footsteps approached with an edge of authority, and the sound of a voice soon cut through the quiet air. What began as a simple act of kindness was about to shift into something much larger. The man had just placed the grocery bags by the elderly woman's door when he heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. At first, he thought little of it. Just another passerby, maybe someone heading home after a long day. But then a sharp, commanding voice rang out from behind him. "Hey, you there! What are you doing?" The words were not spoken in curiosity, but in suspicion, edged with a tone that instantly changed the mood of the quiet street. The elderly woman froze, her hand trembling as she tried to fit her key into the lock. She turned her head slightly and frowned when she saw the uniformed officer walking toward them. The man straightened his back slowly, calm as ever. He had dealt with voices of command before. He had given orders to entire teams of agents, spoken to presidents, and faced criminals who tried to intimidate him. This voice did not unsettle him, but he could feel the tension in the air shifting. The officer walked closer. His eyes narrowed, looking not at the woman, but at the man who had helped her. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "Step away from her." The elderly woman immediately shook her head. No, officer, you don't understand. He was helping me." But the officer lifted his hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Ma'am, I'll handle this." The man stayed silent, watching the officer with steady eyes. There was no anger in his expression, no visible frustration, only patience. The kind of patience that came from years of knowing when silence was more powerful than words. Yet the officer misread that silence. To him, it was defiance. He stepped closer, his voice sharper. "I asked you a question. What are you doing? Here?" You better answer me right now." The man spoke evenly, his voice calm and controlled. "I was helping her carry her groceries, that's all." The officer's eyebrows lifted, but instead of softening, his expression hardened. He let out a short laugh that didn't sound friendly at all. "Helping, huh? That's what you're calling it?" He shook his head, muttering something under his breath as though the explanation didn't deserve belief. The elderly woman, now visibly upset, took a step forward. "Officer, please listen to me. This gentleman carried my bags across the street and brought them here. I couldn't have managed it myself. He's been nothing but kind." But once again, the officer brushed her aside. "Ma'am, I said I'll handle this. Go inside. You don't need to get involved." Her lips parted as if she wanted to protest, but the authority in his voice silenced her. She looked helplessly at the man who had just helped her, her eyes filled with frustration at being ignored. The man gave her a small nod as though assuring her everything would be fine. Then he looked back at the officer. "There's no problem here," he said. But the officer wasn't satisfied. His suspicion only grew stronger. He stepped even closer, looking the man up and down, his gaze filled with an unspoken judgment. "You think you can stand here like you own the place?" he asked. His tone carried more insult than question, a deliberate attempt to belittle. The crowd that had been watching earlier had not completely dispersed. A few people across the street noticed the confrontation and slowed their pace, whispering to one another. They had seen what had happened before, how the man had helped the woman, and now they were watching the situation change into something uncomfortable. The man remained still, his posture firm but not aggressive. "I don't own the place," he replied evenly. "I was helping her. That's all there is to it." The officer tilted his head, almost mocking. "You've got an answer for everything, don't you? Acting calm, like you're smarter than me. You think you're clever?" The man did not respond to the insult. His silence wasn't weakness. It was discipline. He had learned long ago that sometimes responding only gave more power to the one trying to provoke. The officer, however, mistook that calmness as arrogance. He smirked and shook his head. "I've seen your type before. Think you can just walk around, do whatever you want, and no one's going to question you? Well, not on my watch." The elderly woman couldn't stay silent anymore. She raised her voice as best she could. "Officer, that's enough. You're speaking to him unfairly. He's done nothing wrong." But once again, the officer acted as if her words carried no weight. He focused entirely on the man, almost forgetting that anyone else was there. "You got some ID on you?" the officer barked suddenly. "Show me some identification. Let's see who you really are." The man didn't flinch. He had carried identification through the most dangerous years of his career, documents that opened doors and silenced doubters. But he did not reach for it yet. Instead, he studied the officer carefully, weighing whether the moment called for immediate revelation or patience. The tension thickened, stretching across the sidewalk like a wire ready to snap. The officer shifted his weight, clearly expecting compliance, while the man stood steady, his face unreadable. The crowd across the street whispered louder now. Some of them recognized the calm figure. They weren't entirely certain, but his face was familiar, one they had seen on news channels years ago, standing at podiums, giving speeches with authority and conviction. The recognition began spreading from person to person like a ripple, yet the officer remained unaware. He was so caught up in his own assumptions that he didn't notice the whispers. He didn't see the small group of onlookers exchanging knowing glances. The man still hadn't revealed who he was. He didn't need to prove himself to the officer. Not yet. What mattered was maintaining his dignity, even as disrespect was thrown his way. The elderly woman's hands trembled on her door key. She looked torn between retreating into the safety of her apartment and staying outside to defend the man who had just helped her. Finally, she placed her hand on her chest and said softly, "This isn't right." The officer's voice cut through her words. I said, "Show me your ID. Don't make me ask again." The man's calm gaze didn't waver. "Are you sure you want to keep talking to me like this?" he asked, his tone not threatening but steady, almost warning. The officer chuckled dismissively. "What, you think you're somebody important?" In that moment, the situation teetered on the edge. The officer was convinced of his control, while the man stood as still as stone, unshaken. The crowd waited, breaths held, curious to see what would unfold. The elderly woman's groceries still sat by the door, forgotten in the rising tension. What had started as a simple act of kindness was turning into a confrontation that revealed more about character than anyone expected. The man wasn't angry. He wasn't flustered. He simply understood something the officer did not. Respect should not depend on assumptions, and authority did not excuse arrogance. The afternoon sun dipped a little lower, shadows stretching across the pavement, as the man stood quietly before the officer who thought he held all the power. The stage was set for a revelation that would soon change the direction of the entire encounter. The air between them felt tight, as if the space itself had narrowed. The officer stood close, expecting the man to hurry and respond. The elderly woman watched with worry, her fingers still resting on the key, her door half open, her groceries forgotten by her feet. A few people on the sidewalk had paused, their curiosity slowly turning into quiet concern. Cars passed in the distance. A bus sighed at the corner, and the city kept moving. But here, time felt slower. The man took a gentle breath. He had learned long ago that the quieter he became, the clearer everything looked. He lifted his chin just a little and met the officer's eyes. Then he spoke in a calm, steady voice that carried more weight than volume. "Do you know who you're talking to?" The officer's expression flickered for a split second, as if the question nudged a thought he didn't expect. He shifted his stance and gave a short, dismissive smile. "Doesn't matter," he said. "You're going to show me your ID." The man didn't move yet. He kept his hands visible and relaxed, his shoulders open, his voice level. "I will cooperate," he said, "but first, listen to the witness." He nodded toward the elderly woman. "She can tell you exactly what happened." The officer glanced at her but did not invite her to speak. His attention snapped back to the man. "I asked you," he repeated, emphasizing each word. "Not her." A couple by the curb exchanged looks. They had seen everything. A teenager paused his scooter, tapping a foot against the ground to keep balance. A shopkeeper leaned out of his doorway, wiping his hands on a towel, eyes narrowed with interest. The mood around them grew thoughtful, like a crowd at the start of a performance, not sure yet what story they were about to witness. The man held the moment with silence. It was a kind silence, not a stubborn one. It invited reflection. He did not crowd the officer. He did not rush. He let the pause breathe. He had taught this once. How to slow a tense exchange by refusing to feed the fire with more heat, voice low, hands visible, space respected, clear requests. It was a script he could follow even in his sleep because he had helped write it for others. "Officer," he said at last, "I respect your role. I also ask for respect in return. The lady needed help. I helped her. That is the full story." The officer's jaw tightened. "Don't give me stories," he said. "Give me your wallet." The elderly woman found her voice again. "Please, sir," she said to the officer, gentle but firm. "He is telling the truth. He helped me cross the street. He carried my bags. He has been respectful the entire time." The officer opened his mouth, then closed it. The shopkeeper stepped a little farther out, and the boy on the scooter put one foot down, listening more carefully. A man in a gray jacket at the corner squinted at the face of the calm stranger and whispered to the woman next to him. She frowned, then tilted, her head as if trying to place a memory. The man watched the officer without judgment. If he had wanted to dominate the moment, he could have done so with a single sentence. He could have ended the tension with a name and a title that would change the officer's tone at once. But his own lessons echoed inside him. Titles make quiet. A room, he had told young trainees, but character is what changes a mind. The test here was not whether he could win, it was whether he could guide the space toward dignity. "Before I show you anything," he said quietly, "I want to be sure we understand each other. Respect is not a special privilege. It is the starting point." Across the street, a young woman took out her phone, not out of troublemaking, but out of habit. She raised it slowly, and then, after a second thought, lowered it again. The calm in the man's voice made her feel that the moment deserved care, not spectacle. She tucked the phone away and simply watched. The officer seemed unsettled by how steady the man was. He had approached expecting tension to bend easily. He had expected raised voices, fast replies, maybe a stumble of words. Instead, he met patience that did not crack and a posture that did not beg. He met a gaze that did not rise or fall, but stayed level like a horizon. "I asked your name," the man said softly, not as a challenge, but as a courtesy. "Would you tell me?" The officer looked surprised. He hesitated. "Officer Cole," he said at last. "Thank you, Officer Cole," the man replied. "I'm glad to meet you. My name is not important yet. What is important is that you allow a witness to speak, and that you ask questions before you make conclusions." The officer bristled again, pulled back by habit. "I make the questions." "Here," he said. "You answer," the man inclined his head. "Then ask," he said, open-palmed. "I will answer." The offer hung in the air. It was sincere. A few seconds passed. The officer seemed caught between pride and protocol. He swallowed, then asked, "Did you approach this woman at the corner?" "Yes," the man said. "Did you carry her bags?" "Yes." "Did you come to this door with her?" "Yes." The officer shifted again, looking for something that sounded wrong. The answers were steady, consistent, plain. He tried a different angle. "Why did you approach her?" "She needed help," the man said. A murmur spread like a small wave through the onlookers. The boy on the scooter nodded to himself. The shopkeeper folded his towel. The couple by the curb relaxed a fraction. The elderly woman felt her breath steady. "Do you have identification?" Officer Cole asked, returning to his request. "I do," the man said. He moved carefully, slow enough to be read as respectful, not defiant, not secretive. He placed a hand on his jacket pocket and paused, his voice even. "I am reaching into my inner pocket now. Is that all right?" The officer hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." The man reached in and brought out a slim, worn wallet. The leather was neat but old, the sort of item kept not for show but for trust. He held it at his side rather than opening it at once. Then he looked at the officer again and asked in the same calm voice, "Officer Cole, do you know who you're talking to?" The words were not grand. They were not loud. They were simple, and somehow they seemed larger because of that. The people nearby caught them and repeated them in whispers, not mocking, but curious. The man in the gray jacket by the corner snapped his fingers softly. "I know that face," he whispered to the woman with him. "From the news. Years ago. He spoke at press conferences. He stood behind a podium. He was in charge of—" He stopped, as if speaking the thought out loud would change the air again. Another onlooker turned to him. "In charge of what?" she asked softly. "A big agency," he said. His voice dropped to a hush. "The big one." The officer didn't notice the whispers. He felt his own pause stretching longer than he liked. He wanted the moment to move. He wanted a shape he could control. "I asked you for your ID," he said again, trying to bring the exchange back to a simple path. "You did," the man agreed. and I will show it to you. He lifted the wallet a little higher, the edge of a card visible between the folds. But listen to the lady first, because whether I am somebody or nobody, her voice matters. The elderly woman gave a grateful, almost relieved smile. "Thank you," she said. She looked at Officer Cole, not angry, simply clear. "Sir, he saw me struggling. He helped without asking for anything. He walked with me. He was calm and kind. There was nothing strange here. Only help." The words were steady and soft. They landed gently and stayed, like a warm cup placed on a table that needed warmth. The officer looked at her, and for the first time, he really listened. The moment pressed in on him. He could feel all the eyes around, not harsh, but attentive. He felt the weight of what he represented. He felt the difference between a quick judgment and a thoughtful decision. The man watched him with patient eyes. He did not rush the officer into an answer. He gave him room to choose the better path. Silence, again, did its work. The cities. Sound moved in and out, tires on asphalt, a bird on a wire, the soft thud of a door closing somewhere up the block, like a gentle rhythm encouraging calm. "Do you work in law?" a voice asked from the sidewalk. It wasn't rude, just curious. It came from a middle-aged woman holding a tote bag from the local library. She had seen the way the man spoke, the way he treated the moment like a careful conversation, rather than a contest. The man turned to her kindly. "I used to," he said. "Long ago." That answer, too, spread through the watchers, settling into their early guesses. A young man in a blue cap drew in a breath, eyes widening. He nudged his friend. "I think that's him," he whispered. "From those hearings, remember, the serious voice, the careful words." Officer Cole still did not hear them. He was inside his own thoughts now, wrestling with something he hadn't planned on meeting. The authority he wore on his shoulder had been the loudest thing in the space when he arrived. Now another kind of authority filled the air, earned, quiet, steady. It wasn't about rank. It was about presence. The man lifted the wallet a bit higher. He did not open it yet. "Officer Cole," he said, not unkindly, "I'm going to ask you a question I've asked many young officers in training. What is the first duty when you come to a scene?" The officer blinked. "Control the situation." The man nodded. "Control is important, but what comes even before control?" A long second passed. The officer's mouth parted as if a word had landed, but hadn't shaped itself yet. The man's eyes were patient. "Understanding?" the man said gently. "You ask, you listen, you learn what is in front of you, then you decide. That is how trust is built, and trust is what allows control to be gentle rather than hard." The words were plain. They did not accuse. They taught. The man opened his wallet slowly, the way a careful teacher opens a book in a quiet classroom. Inside, everything was neat. Cards in their places, a small case that held something official, edges smooth with years of use. He did not rush. He held the wallet so Officer Cole could see, and so the elderly woman and the onlookers could see too. There was no dramatic wave of his hand, just a calm, clear reveal. Officer Cole leaned in. His eyes moved over the first card, then the second. His gaze stopped, focused, and stayed. The man did not move. He waited as one waits for a door to fully open. The officer's lips parted, then closed. He read the name again. He looked at the seal, the title, and the confirmation stamp. He stood a little straighter without deciding to stand straighter. His shoulders stopped pushing forward. For a moment, even the radio at his shoulder seemed quieter, like a sound behind glass. The man spoke in that easy, measured tone. "You can hold it if you like," he said. "Careful with the sleeve." Officer Cole didn't take it. At least, not yet. He looked from the card to the man's face and back again, as if trying to connect this quiet figure with the serious name in his hand. He swallowed once. When he finally reached out, he did so gently, as if touching something he hadn't earned. He read out loud, softly, as if testing the reality of the words. Former Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. A hush passed over the small crowd like a breeze over tall grass. Someone exhaled and forgot to inhale for a second. The boy on the scooter blinked. The shopkeeper lowered his towel. The couple by the curb tilted forward as if drawn by a string. No one cheered. No one gasped loudly. It was quieter than that, fuller than that. It was the quiet that comes when puzzle pieces click into place. The elderly woman's shoulders relaxed. Her eyes filled with relief and pride. Pride not because he had a big title, but because the calm and kindness she had felt from the start had a story behind it. She looked at Officer Cole, and her voice, when it came, was soft and steady. "He told you the truth," she said. "He told you from the beginning." Officer Cole handed the wallet back. His hand was careful. "Sir," he said, voice lower now, I didn't know." The man nodded once. "I believe that," he replied. "That is why I asked you to listen first." A light on a nearby. Window shifted as a cloud slid past the sun. People breathed again. The tension didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It stopped being a wall and became a question. What happens now? The officer cleared his throat. He wasn't sure where to put his hands, so he kept them still at his sides. "I approached with concern," he said. "There have been reports of—" He stopped, finding the end of the sentence was not helping him. He tried again. "I should have asked more questions. I should have listened better." The man did not push. He didn't press into the officer's discomfort. He gave him room to find the right words without shaming him. "It is not easy to slow down," he said, "but it is necessary. You represent safety. People need to feel your fairness before they feel your force." Officer Cole nodded, the truth of that sentence landing in his posture. He looked at the elderly woman and said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry for causing you distress." She nodded, weary but gracious. "I only wanted to go home," she said, "and he helped me." A middle-aged woman near the curb raised her hand halfway, as if asking for permission to speak in a meeting. "Officer," she said gently, "many of us saw him help her. He was kind. That's why we were watching. We didn't want anything to go wrong." He gave a small nod in her direction. "Thank you," he said. The words were quiet, but they mattered. A patrol car turned onto the block, its lights off. No siren. It rolled to a stop near the corner. A second officer stepped out, older, with the steady walk of someone who had seen many long days. He glanced once at Officer Cole, then at the man, then at the elderly woman, then at the faces around them. He read the scene with a quick mind and a calm heart. "Everything all right here?" the older officer asked, tone open, not sharp. Officer Cole answered quickly. "Sarge, we're good," he said. Then he paused, looked again at the man, and corrected himself. "We're getting there." The sergeant walked closer, respectful. "Good afternoon," he said. "I'm Sergeant Alvarez. Do we need to document anything here?" The man shook his head lightly. "So far, we have words," he said. "I hope we keep it that way." Sergeant Alvarez looked to the elderly woman. "Ma'am?" She lifted her hand and pointed at the man with gratitude. "He helped me," she said. "That's the truth." The sergeant nodded, then turned to the man. "Sir, thank you," he said simply. He did not ask for a title. He did not ask for a name. He spoke to the person who had helped, not the position he once held. That small choice pressed the air in a kinder direction. Officer Cole shifted again, then seemed to decide that standing still was better than fidgeting. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then tried one more time. "Sir," he said, addressing the man with care, I spoke to you in a way I would not want to be spoken to. I'm sorry. I made assumptions. That's not how I should do this job. The man held his eyes steady and honest. Thank you, he said. An apology is not a small thing when it is real. The crowd did not clap or cheer. Instead, their faces softened. A few nodded to themselves. It felt like watching a tight knot come loose, thread by thread, until the line lay straight and useful again. The man put his wallet away. He did it as slowly as he had opened it, not to drag out the moment, but to honor it. Then he picked up one of the grocery bags and turned to the elderly woman. If you don't mind, he said, I'd like to carry this inside for you. Her smile returned, tired but warm. Please, she said. Thank you. He lifted the bag with practiced ease. As he reached for the second one, Officer Cole stepped forward. Allow me, the officer said. He did not rush. He handled the bag with the same care the man had shown, as if the simple act of carrying it could be a small promise to do better. Together, they brought the bags into the apartment entryway. The building door clicked softly behind them, leaving the sergeant and the watchers outside. The hallway smelled faintly of floor polish and thyme. Someone, somewhere, was cooking with herbs. The woman led them to the elevator, and they waited, without speaking. It was a quiet that didn't press. It rested. The elevator arrived with a soft bell. They stepped inside. The man stood near the panel, the officer near the door, the woman in the center steadying herself with a hand on the rail. As the elevator rose, the woman looked at the officer and said, I accept your apology. Thank you, ma'am, he replied, voice low. She looked at the man. And thank you for not letting the moment become ugly, she added. Sometimes the way you hold yourself changes everything. He offered a small smile. We all held it together, he said. You spoke. He listened. That's how we move. Forward. The doors opened to a narrow hallway with cream-colored walls and framed family photos. The woman's apartment was only a few steps away. She unlocked the door. The man carried the first bag to the tiny kitchen, placed it on the counter, and came back for the second. Officer Cole followed his lead. They set the groceries down carefully, lined up the jars to keep them from rolling, stood back to give the woman space. Would you like some water? She asked, looking from one man to the other. Thank you, ma'am, but I'm okay, Officer Cole said. I'm fine too, the man added, then glanced at the officer. We should finish our talk outside. The sergeant is waiting. She nodded, grateful and calm now. I'll be all right, she said. And thank you again. They stepped out and let the door close. The two men walked side by side down the hall, not as friends yet, but as people who had chosen not to be opponents. The elevator ride down was silent, but not tense. When the doors opened to the lobby, they saw Sergeant Alvarez near the entrance, speaking quietly with the couple from the curb. He looked up, read their faces, and the corner of his mouth lifted a little. Outside again, the street was back to its regular life. The watchers lingered, but the feeling had changed. It was less like a crowd and more like neighbors who had shared a lesson. The boy with the scooter finally put both feet on the deck and tested the wheels in a small circle, as if the world had started turning smoothly again. Sergeant Alvarez nodded to the man. Appreciate your patience, he said. We'll note that everything is resolved. The man nodded back. Thank you for arriving without heat, he replied. It helped. He turned to Officer Cole. The officer stood straight, not rigid, with a kind of careful readiness that suggested he had chosen a new direction inside himself. The man's voice was firm, but not hard. I will not file a complaint, he said, if you make good use of this moment. I will, Officer Cole said. It wasn't a promise said to get out of trouble. It was a promise he gave himself. In front of others, which is the best kind, because it asks for accountability. Review the basics, the man continued. Questions before conclusions. Tone before tactics. Dignity first. Yes, sir, the officer replied. He did not say the title he had read on the card. He said, "Sir," to the person in front of him. The man glanced around at the faces who had stayed. "Thank you for watching with care," he said to them. "Community is built this way, by staying present, by speaking up gently, by listening." A few people nodded. The shopkeeper lifted his towel in a small wave. The library tote woman smiled and held her hand over her heart for a second. The couple by the curb looked relieved, and the boy with the scooter. The man walked away from the block with a steady pace, the same quiet rhythm he had kept since the moment he stepped forward to help the elderly woman. He did not look for applause. He did not need it. He turned at the corner and paused for a breath, feeling the late afternoon light soften along the buildings. He looked back once, not to check on anyone, but to give the moment a respectful farewell. The street had returned to normal, but it wasn't quite the same. Something gentle had settled there, like a lesson written in the air. He continued to a small cafe a few doors down. It was the kind of place that served tea in glass cups and had a chalkboard with kind quotes by the register. He ordered tea and sat by the window. The cup was warm in his hands. He watched the sidewalk move, people carrying bags, chatting, laughing, going home. Life was a river again, and his part in it that day had been a stone placed to guide the flow a little better. He wasn't thinking about titles. He wasn't thinking about news. He was thinking about how easily small moments could turn into big ones, and how a steady voice could help those moments turn the right way. He took a sip and let the warm taste calm his breath. A soft knock on the glass broke his thoughts. He looked up and saw the boy who had been on the scooter earlier. The boy lifted a hand and gave a small wave, a shy smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. The man nodded back and smiled. The boy did not come inside. He simply rolled away with a little more care, as if the world deserved gentler wheels. Across the street, the elderly woman had finished putting away her groceries. She sat in her small kitchen for a moment and looked at the door, remembering the calm voice and the steady kindness that had walked with her. She took a notepad from a drawer and wrote 2 short notes. One was for herself. Ask for help when needed is not weakness. The second was for the building's notice board. Thank you to the kind neighbor who carried my bags and spoke with patience. You made my day easier. She did not use his name. She did not know it. But her words were true and simple, and they brightened the hallway where other neighbors would pass. Back on the sidewalk, Sergeant Alvarez finished speaking with the couple from the curb. He was a practical man, not easily shaken, but he felt something good had happened and wanted to protect it. He turned to Officer Cole. "Walk with me," he said. They moved away from the crowd that was fading back into regular life. "I made assumptions," Officer Cole said, before the sergeant could begin. He did not rush the words. He did not try to soften them. "I didn't listen. I let my tone go ahead of my questions." The sergeant nodded. "I saw," he said, "and I saw you change. That matters." "I want to do better," the younger officer said. "You will," the sergeant replied, "but a wish is not a plan. Write what you did and what you should have done. Bring it to roll call. We'll talk it through." "I will," Officer Cole said. He glanced back at the apartment door, then at the cafe window where the man sat with his tea. He felt a weight in his chest, not heavy with shame, but heavy with care. "I'm grateful he chose to teach instead of humiliate," he added. "Many people with power speak loud," the sergeant said. "The wise ones speak steady. Learn from that." The next morning at the precinct, Officer Cole arrived early. He sat at a desk with a lined notebook and wrote a page titled Questions Before Conclusions. He listed simple steps: greet, observe, ask, listen, thank, decide. He wrote notes about tone. He wrote a reminder to himself. Respect is the first step, not a gift. When roll call began, he raised his hand and asked if he could share. He kept it simple. He did not mention the man's name or title. He spoke about the elderly woman and the choice to listen. He spoke about the calm that changed everything. The room was quiet when he finished. A few heads nodded. The sergeant said, "Good work. We'll practice that on patrol today." In the cafe, the man finished his tea and left a generous tip. He walked to a nearby park with tall trees and an old fountain. Pigeons cooed in a neat circle by a bench where someone had scattered crumbs. He sat and called an old colleague, not to boast, but to share a thought. "We teach with our choices," he said. "We say one thing in a classroom and another thing with our faces on the street." The colleague agreed. They talked for a few minutes about training, about how to pass on calm like a craft, and then they said goodbye. He then wrote a short email to the precinct. It was not a complaint. It was a note of record. He asked that it be forwarded to the sergeant on duty. The message said, "Thank you for your measured presence. Please give constructive coaching to the responding officer. He listened when it counted. That can be built upon." He signed it with his name, but he did not list his old title. If they needed to know, they would know. The point was the practice, not his past. Later that day, the library tote woman stopped by the building's notice board and read the elderly woman's thank you note. She added a sticky note under it. "Kindness is a good headline." The shopkeeper, walking home with his towel rolled up in his bag, smiled at the same board and told his wife over dinner that the block had felt different all afternoon. "Calmer," he said, like people were carrying something soft in their pockets. The next week, the community center held its regular evening meeting. It was not a big group, 10 chairs, a coffee urn, a box of crackers. People shared small updates, a tree branch that needed trimming, a crossing light that blinked too fast, a plan for the block's summer picnic. The elderly woman stood and told a short version of her story, how a stranger had helped her, how a tense moment had changed into a careful conversation, how an apology had been given and accepted. She did not dramatize it. She told it like you tell a recipe, simple steps, clear measures, a good result. The others listened and felt the lesson sit down between them like a quiet guest. The center leader said, "Let's put a line in our newsletter. Watch, speak gently, listen, support good steps." Officer Cole kept his promise to himself. On a later call, he arrived at a scene where 2 neighbors were arguing over a parking space. He did not raise his voice. He asked questions. He listened. He repeated back what he heard. He explained the rules with a calm tone and a steady face. The moment settled without sparks. One neighbor apologized. The other accepted it. As the officer walked back to his car, he realized he had been breathing evenly the whole time. It felt better. He made a note of that. As for the man, he did not change his routine. He bought groceries on Tuesdays, called his sister on Thursdays, and took long walks on Sundays. But he noticed something small inside himself, too. He felt a fresh respect for the slow tools, pauses, gentle questions, steady hands. He had known their value for years, but that day had sharpened them again, like a craftsman who takes a moment to clean and oil the tools he uses most often. One afternoon, a young officer, new to the force, straight from the academy, approached him at the park, hat in hand, polite. "Sir," the young officer said, "Sergeant Alvarez told us a story in training about a man who taught with calm instead of anger. I think that was you. I just wanted to say thank you. I want to do the job in that way." The man smiled and shook the young officer's hand. "It is a good way," he said. "Ask before you decide. Keep your voice level. Protect dignity, yours and theirs. You will never regret those habits." A month later, the elderly woman found herself at the same intersection with lighter bags. She saw another person, this time a teenager, help an older neighbor across the street. She smiled and waved when they reached the curb. The teenager waved back and grinned. It wasn't the same story repeated. It was the same spirit shared. Which is better? The city moved on, as cities do. New days brought new problems, new joys, new weather. But the block where the lesson had unfolded held a softer memory. People seemed to give each other a tiny bit more room on the sidewalk. Drivers paused with a touch more patience at the crosswalk. Kids on scooters looked over their shoulders a second time before turning. None of it would be written in the paper. All of it mattered. The man passed by that block occasionally. He would glance up at the windows, at the clean glass door, at the notice board with fresh flyers and sometimes a thank you note from someone else. He did not stop to point or tell anyone, "This is where it happened." He simply walked with the same quiet presence, like a person carrying a lantern under a coat, not to show off the light, but to keep it ready in case someone needed to see. Every now and then his old life reached out, an invitation to speak, a request for advice, a class that wanted stories. When he accepted, he told the story of the elderly woman and the officer and the quiet street. He told it in simple steps with simple lines. Help first. Ask questions. Keep your voice calm. Show your hands. Offer dignity. Accept apologies. Make better habits. He did not name the city or the officers. He did not need to. The lesson worked in every place. He ended those talks the same way he ended his day that afternoon, by resisting the urge to turn the moment into a show. He would say, respect must not depend on who someone is. It must be there because they are someone. Then he would pause, let the words stay in the room, and nod. On the evening of a soft, golden day, he passed the cafe again. The chalkboard, by the register, held a new quote in messy handwriting. Start with respect. He smiled and stepped inside for tea. The barista, who had seen him often, said, "On the house today." He thanked her and left a tie,